I want to thank you guys all for sticking it out. This has been obviously a very full day to sit there, and it's hard enough sometimes just to listen to one message on a Sunday, never mind 4 one-hour sessions. And so thank you guys so much. This has been fun.
I read your book, which is fantastic.
Thanks.
So I was looking at your last 3 chapters of the book. So when we have, according to your book, 400 terrorist groups in the areas in the world, and 90% of them are Islam, right?
Yes.
So therefore, I want to know, what do we do about it? So I think as we as Christians that are trying to serve the Lord and outreach, tell us what we do about it. Now, you respond to that in 3 different chapters. The one, how to respond, pray, 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 pray. But what do we do about it?
Yeah, thank you. Well, that's a very important question, multiple-part question. First of all, obviously, I haven't had time to get into every subject that could be discussed. The primary paradigm that has been embraced by end-time teachers over the years has been that the Antichrist empire, the Antichrist religion, would completely overwhelm the entire earth. Okay, and that's based on several passages that say all the nations will be gathered against Jerusalem. And the Antichrist will sort of have power over people of every tongue, tribe, and nation. The problem with believing that literally, in a hyper-literal fashion, that the Antichrist will come to dominate the entire earth, is that there are numerous passages throughout the Bible that use that exact type of language, but are clearly not referring to the entire earth. For instance, Daniel says to King Nebuchadnezzar, he says, "You, O king, are the King of kings. The Lord of heaven has given you rule over all the nations of the world." Well, we know that King Nebuchadnezzar ruled over really a small portion of the world. It was a good section of the known world at that time, but King Nebuchadnezzar's authority did not extend over Europe, didn't even make it to Europe, didn't extend to New Zealand, etc. And there are dozens of passages like that. And what we have, and we need to be careful again, we need to approach literature according to its rules, on its own standards. Eastern literature often uses hyperbole. Hyperbole is far more common in Eastern cultures. The best man in my wedding used to say that his dad, he was Asian, his dad would yell at him and say, "I'm going to kill you 1,000 times!" And I'm trying to think of some other examples. Saddam Hussein, "This is going to be the mother of all battles." Everything are these just very expressive, type of expressions. I don't personally believe, I believe that the context of biblical prophecy is primarily regional. I don't believe the Antichrist is going to overwhelm the entire earth. This is very controversial, and some people will be like, "What?" Simply because it's such a drastic shift. I don't believe the mark of the beast is going to be enforced throughout the entire earth. I believe it's primarily going to be regional. I think it'll have, its place. But I believe largely in the West we have our own issues to wrestle with. Now, if this thing goes long enough, and Christ doesn't return for another 50 years, then the Islamic dominance of the earth could extend quite a bit further. It really could. And we in the United States could begin to see many of the things that are already taking place in Europe, where there are no-go areas of European nations, Rotterdam, Paris, to where the Muslim population is so overwhelming that police can't even go in those areas, So that's a reality. But because, this is my opinion, because the Bible does not give us this information about what will specifically happen to the United States or what will specifically happen to any number of nations. He gives us some information, but not all. That we as believers we are to resist the temptation to give in to a fatalistic attitude. Okay? The Bible, God never rewards passivity. He does not reward us sitting back and saying, "Well, this is all prophesied, it's going to happen, I'm just going to sit back and get a gun and wait for it to happen." God always wants us to partner with Him in prayer and in action. Pray and act. Pray and vote. Pray and do all sorts of things. Be, an activist. People go, well, why did you participate in a secular book? Again, to me, there are young men going over to Iraq every day and dying because they believe deeply that freedom is worth defending. And I'm just a husband and a dad, and I'm too old to go over to Iraq now, or I'm trying to do my part. I'm trying. If I'm going to go down, I'm going to go down fighting. I'm going to go down fighting with the pen, with my words. And so I believe, one, we need to fight. And there are many, many different ways that you do that. But you stand for freedom. And, Christians are called to stand for the gospel, not freedoms. No, I believe that freedoms, the underlying principles of Western culture, the value of human rights, all of these things are worth fighting for. With my first book, I had to decide, am I willing to die for Christ? And it was like, well, I don't really want to, but if I have to, I'm willing to potentially take that risk. Now with this, Why We Left Islam, the publisher went ahead and put this picture of Muhammad on the cover with a big tear through the middle, which I really didn't have a say in. But I had to ask myself, initially I was very, very opposed to it. And I had to ask myself, well, wait a minute. Are you willing to die for freedom of speech? I went, well, wait a minute. That doesn't seem quite as important or noble as dying for Christ. But ultimately I had to say, no, this is something I believe in. From a Christian perspective, prayer is always the most important. Prayer changes things. Through prayer, we literally govern this world. If we could really grasp how powerful we are through the power of prayer and how we can partner with the Lord. So our job, because the Bible hasn't told us what's going to be the ultimate destiny of the United States or Switzerland or this, that, or the other, there are some nations that the Lord gives us very clear destinies of. Because we don't know, our job is to stand and pray and say, Lord, have mercy on this nation. Lord, we are in sin in multiple ways, but Lord, give us revival. Give us genuine biblical revival. Revive us. Lord, I pray for this nation. Lord, I pray for my state. I pray for my city. I pray for my neighborhood. And I pray for my family. Lord, have mercy on us. Shelter us in the day of your anger. And I believe that there will be significant sections of the earth that will, I know this sounds bizarre, but that will make it through the end times with significantly less absolute chaos than other parts of the world will see. So there's hope in that. There's hope in that. But much of it does rest on whether or not the church prays. And our job is to continue to pray until it has come to pass. After it's come to pass, if someone is dying of a disease, you pray until they're gone. And you don't give up until. And that's what going down fighting means to me. Now that's prayer. There's a million other things that we can do. I'm not sure if I answered all your questions, but that's definitely a big part of it. Well, outreach. One of the biggest dangers of having a meeting like this is for everybody to sit in the audience and go, oh my gosh, what's this guy saying makes sense. I mean, yeah, I've always heard about the end times, but so much of the end times stuff that I read about reads like a really cheap science fiction comic book, and it's really kind of just been out there as this almost morbid fascination. But saying, oh my gosh, this is happening. I may be part of that generation. I may live to... Somebody's going to have to see it eventually. And that reality starts hitting home, and then all of a sudden you go, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? How am I going to pay my mortgage when the economy just collapses? And all of the realities start hitting home. Oh, I'm sorry. I wasn't supposed to go there. Talking about outreach. The danger is that we go, Muslims are all dangerous, and the danger is to fall into fear. Fear is not from the Lord, okay? Fear is the enemy. Fear is from the devil. As believers, we are called to boldly and lovingly proclaim the gospel to Muslims. The vast majority of Muslims are deceived and lost. There's a great book that just came out, and it's very charismatic, it's very kind of prophetic, but it's called The Destiny of Islam in the End Times. And so, you have to weed through some of the style and the flair of the book. But this guy, Faisal Malik, he's a former Muslim, he makes a great point. And he says that there are two spirits, if you will. There's the spirit of Ishmael, which is, Ishmael, the name literally means God hears, okay? There's the spirit of Ishmael, which was the 15-year-old son of Abraham who was suddenly kicked out of the family. He and his mother just got sent off. And suddenly he went from having a father to not having a father, to being an orphan. And the Lord, I believe, and Faisal articulates this, and I believe it's accurate, the Lord has within the spirit of Ishmael, He has this promise to hear. And so for those Muslims who bow down 5 times a day and cry out to the God that they don't know, ultimately, saying, guide me to the straight path, the Lord, throughout the earth today, is directly saving Muslims. There are Muslims coming to Christ throughout the Muslim world unlike any other time in history, and there's many reasons for that. Media, internet, but the Lord uses all of these trends. There's also the spirit of Edom, the spirit of Esau, which is a violent entity, and so that is the spirit that the Lord is going to judge. The spirit within the Muslim community that He's going to judge and come down on with His hammer, if you will, is the spirit of Esau. But we need to call out to the spirit of Ishmael, and we need to approach each person as an individual. Fear is not going to get us anywhere. We can't fear Muslims. We need to engage Muslims. We need to get involved. I mean, this is the future. And again, that's why I highlighted ministries like my friend Robert Seaver's equipping ministries that are calling the church to break through these various barriers and begin to reach out to Muslims. It's our mandate,
My question is actually an extension of what you're teaching us in the fact that is it or is it not true that in the end times there will be a reestablishing of the sacrifices that will be almost like a significant act of the Antichrist in his deception of peace? Is this something that I have misread?
That's certainly debated. I believe that the temple will be rebuilt. I believe that. I mean, Paul seems to make it pretty clear. He says that the Antichrist will set himself up in the temple of God as if he is God. Jesus talks about the abomination of desolation being set up in the temple. There are some that think that this is more allegorical. I believe that part of the peace treaty, the covenant of death, which is what the Bible calls it, this false peace treaty that the Antichrist will mediate between Israel and the surrounding nations, will involve the ability of Israel to rebuild a Jewish temple and share the Temple Mount. I believe that. Is there a chance that may not take place? We need to be open to all possibilities, but I think that there probably will, and I believe that during the first 3.5 years of the final 7-year period that sacrifices will be, sometime within there, will be established, and then the Antichrist will bring those to a close, and he will take over the temple, if you will, and establish himself from that place.
Without putting yourself in a dangerous position, can you give us some kind of a background? What was your journey coming along to this conclusion? What kind of education, background? Again, don't say anything that...
Yeah, I mean, it's really not all that impressive, to be honest with you. I went to a little Bible school that was unaccredited. It doesn't even exist anymore, so it was a non-accredited, non-existent school. I was going to then piggyback from there. I got my associates in theology and practical ministry. I was going to then piggyback from there up to Bethany College of Missions to go be a missionary to the Middle East. But in the midst of that, I had a Jewish teacher who was just brilliant. And I just said, Lord, I want to understand this issue. I want to understand the the issue of the Middle East, really your heart. And so I went ahead and I went to the Middle East and lived there for the lesser part of a year, and lived in both Muslim countries and Israel, and just sought God's heart. I mean, I was just on a mission. Lord, teach me what this is all about. And when I was there, I decided to not go to the mission school, but to come back to the town that I was from and go to school for engineering that I would use as a degree to get me into. Then I started a business to get myself through school, and then I got married, and then I had kids, and suddenly the business that I started was doing better than the engineering degree would do, and I had kids, and my wife had all these physical ailments, and it was just, there's no way we're going to move to the Middle East, and we've got kids, and life happened. And but back when I was in school, I was the president of the Christian fellowship that I started, and it was a very international college. It was back in the mid-'90s. Started really engaging Muslims back then. That's really when it started. Then later, just sort of living the married life, we got a computer, and I said, you know something? I mean, I woke up to the reality of this revolution. I said, I can be a missionary in my own house. I can reach people. And one thing led to another, and I ended up starting this forum, and I had maybe 100 Muslims that were really engaged, and it was specifically for Muslim seekers that were seeking Christ or wanted to discuss it, and did see a few Muslims come to Christ. And then I kind of backed off, and I got involved with answeringislam.org and just trying to help out a little bit with them. So in the midst of all that, I really started discovering Islamic eschatology, digging into that and going, my goodness, this information needs to be made available to the church. And I thought I would just kind of put this stuff out there and just fade into the background. And just one thing led to another. It was a little self-published book, and I mean, it's gone out. I mean, it's made an impact, and I did nothing to promote it for the first 2 years, and so it's sort of, this thing has just imposed itself on me. And again, I'm just a dad, I'm just a bozo, but doing my best to try to do my part. I mean, and I don't even know how long I'm going to do this, if I'm going to keep speaking or not. I'm kind of giving it a shot. It's hard for me, honestly, even just for a day, to leave my family and my kids and the whole deal. So we'll see how it goes.
When did you come to know Christ?
1990. I got saved in an old-fashioned tent revival meeting in the back of a grocery store in Memphis. And I was from South Boston. I was a hippie, and as far as 1980s hippies can be. And a friend of mine and I were driving across country to buy some cheap land, and we got to this Piggly Wiggly or something, and there was this big tent set up, and it was real hot, and it was Memphis, and we were going like, man, we got to hit a Taco Bell and lock the door and wash up or something. And then we saw the tent, and I said, let's get baptized. And we stayed for the meeting, and the conviction of the Holy Spirit fell on me. And he said, either you change your life or you are going to hell. He was a hellfire preacher. And one thing led to another, and so I was 19. The Lord moves in mysterious ways.
Hi. This morning you kind of just briefly spoke a little bit on the rapture, the pre-rapture. Did you say whether you agreed with the pre-rapture or disagreed? Or if you could just elaborate a little bit on that, I would appreciate it.
The pre-tribulational rapture, the doctrine of the pre-tribulational rapture, is there's a certain aura about it that if you believe anything other than it, in many, many circles, it's as if you will not be allowed to join in any of the reindeer games. It's weird. It's weird that doctrine above so many other doctrines takes such a stance. Oh, that guy's not pre-trib. He must be off. He's this close to being a Jehovah's Witness or something. I don't believe in the pre-tribulational rapture. I believe, Jesus said, at that time, many will fall away from the faith. Well, they teach that during the tribulation, that's when people will be coming to Christ. and the Jews will be preaching. It just smacks to me of typical American, narcissistic, life is all about me, we're just going to be delivered. Meanwhile, the Jews are all going to get persecuted for their denial of Christ. And, there may be some good merit in the pre-wrath position, which is articulated in the book, The Rapture Simplified. He makes a distinction between the persecution of Satan and the actual wrath of God. I tend to lean toward the post-tribulational position. Here's wisdom, okay? And this applies to anything in life, and it's pretty simple. Prepare for the worst, hope for the best. And the fact that more Christian leaders don't teach that, they're not saying to the church, prepare for the worst, hope for the best. They're saying, praise God, we're going to be raptured. Says to me that something is wrong. The fact that it's preached that way and not at least presented as a possibility smacks to me of a powerful, almost demonic delusion. I mean, it has the potential to do damage. Because, to me, it's a pretty flimsy argument. I mean, it's a lot of, it's one of those things where, you ever hear some professor explain something to you and you go, I have no idea what he just said, but it sounded really intelligent, so I guess he must be right. Like they take you through passages and you're kind of like, okay, well, it's not conclusive, but I guess all together. I used to be pre-trib, and I don't see it. I just don't see it scripturally. Again, it's such a controversial issue. Just hope for the best, prepare for the worst. Seems to me like that's wisdom. How are we doing? You want to call it a night? Call it a day? Bless you guys. Thank you so much.